right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the fourth field trip in our Bring Nature Home series. I'm so thrilled that we have so many of you, our loyal supporters and Legacy Club members, joining us from across the country as we continue to visit some of the places that you're helping us to protect. We're truly grateful for your unwavering commitment to conservation and for your generous support that makes this work possible. I'm Elaine Lyles, a Legacy Club Stewardship Manager at the Conservancy, and I'm joining you from my home in Central Florida. As we begin today, I do want to acknowledge that the land I am on is the ancestral homelands of the Timucua and Seminole people, and I pay my respect to these traditional indigenous inhabitants and stewards of these lands as well as to their ancestors. I'm truly grateful for the very close relationships that indigenous peoples had and continue to have with the natural world, and for their long commitment to uphold those relations. I know everyone is excited to head to the beach today, as am I, but before we get there, I do want to take just a few seconds to go over a few Zoom housekeeping tips. If you're joining us and would like to see closed captions, please click on the CC icon in the bottom toolbar on your screen. It's in the far right corner. Just click on the CC and you'll see those captions. If you have any questions anytime throughout our presentation today, feel free to submit those in the Q&A box and we will make sure our speakers see those and we'll get to as many of your questions as we can at the end. And we also have a chat box there, and this is where my colleague John will be sharing additional links and helpful resources with you throughout today's virtual field trip. And finally, just as a reminder, we are recording today's field trip and we'll share it with everyone afterward. So today our field trip is going to take us to one of Florida's unique landscapes located on the southeast coast. And today, as we celebrate World Sea Turtle Day, it's only fitting that we're visiting a place where we have been working for decades to protect these majestic creatures. I've had the personal pleasure of visiting Blowing Rocks many times myself, and it truly is a special place, so I'm thrilled that I get to share it with you all today. In fact, Blowing Rocks is one of TNC's most visited preserves, so I'm actually curious how many of you may have visited in the past. My colleague Allison is going to be sharing a poll with everyone, and we'd love for you to, one, tell us where you're joining us from, and two, if you could let us know if you have visited Blowing Rocks in the past. Still have several responses coming in, so I'm going to give it a couple more seconds. All right, Allison, I think you could go ahead and share those results with everybody. So it looks like we are pretty spread across the US, but a good percentage of people actually join us from the West Coast. So we got coast to coast representation today. That's wonderful to see. And also I'm excited that this is the first introduction for most of you to Blowing Rocks. So I'm excited that you get to see another Florida location. So Allison, you can stop sharing those results. So we're going to get started today, and we have a couple of our conservation experts joining us. Blowing Rocks Preserve Manager Kristen Krasko will be joining us first, and then she'll be followed by South Florida Land Conservation Coordinator Sarah Martin. And to go ahead and transport us to the southeast coast of Florida, let's get a bird's eye view of the preserve. And as we're up here, take a moment just to look at that really inspiring blue ocean. I know I would love to be walking along that shoreline right now. And as we continue to go up the coastline, we're actually going to join up with Chris, who is at the preserve. Unfortunately, it's a little wet outside with our unpredictable Florida weather, but she's joining us from indoors. So Chris, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Elaine. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. We are so thrilled that you're joining us today. Welcome to all of our West Coasters. I always say that Blowing Rocks Beach actually reminds me more of a beach that you would see in California or Hawaii than a beach that you would see in Florida. So maybe some of the things that we'll share with you today will look familiar. So I would like to just start off with giving you a little bit of general information about the preserve and then also a little bit of a glimpse into our history. So as you all saw on the map that Elaine showed just a moment ago, we are located in Southeast Florida in Jupiter, and that is around 30 minutes north of Palm Beach. And as you can see in this aerial shot, we are located on a barrier island. So the body of ocean that you see is the Atlantic, And then you'll notice the body of water on the western shoreline of the preserve, and that is a local estuary called the Indian River Lagoon. Now, Blowing Rocks is quite a small preserve by the Nature Conservancy standards. We have a grand total of 73 acres, but as Elaine mentioned, we are one of the most visited preserves that TNC has in the United States. We see around 70,000 guests each year, which is a lot. And part of the reason for that high visitation is that we are located on the very northern edge of the South Florida urban corridor. So some of you may be familiar with locations such as Fort Lauderdale or Miami, and we are within about a 2-hour drive from that area, which is home to around 6 million people. So because of that dense urban development in our area, we know that Blowing Rocks is extremely valuable, both ecologically and also to people, because it's a very peaceful place for them to visit. The preserve that you can see the aerial of here, believe it or not, is home to 36 different imperiled species, despite our small size. And that includes, of course, the habitat for nesting sea turtles, like Elaine mentioned. Happy World Sea Turtle Day. So we are in really almost the peak of sea turtle nesting season at the moment, and Sarah will be able to share more information with you about those sea turtles later on in our program today.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris, for that introduction. And wondering if you could share with everyone a little bit about the history of the preserve, give us a little bit of background. And I know what we look at today is very different if we were here decades ago. So if you could give us a little insight into that as well.
Absolutely. So Blowing Rocks was donated to the Nature Conservancy in 1969. So we recently celebrated our 50th anniversary. And when the land was donated to TNC, like Elaine mentioned, it looked vastly different than the landscape you would see if you visit here today, which hopefully many of you will have a chance to visit in the future since you haven't in the past. But when those 73 acres were donated to TNC, a lot of it was infested with invasive species. In the picture here, you can see one of the predominant ones are these kind of soft looking pine trees. Those are called Australian pines, which yes, they originate from Australia. So, the Nature Conservancy saw a real opportunity to get rid of all these invasives, which was quite an undertaking, so that we could get those native ecosystems back in place. So starting in the mid 1980s, the Nature Conservancy staff planned and oversaw a massive habitat restoration. So that actually took place on about 48 of our 73 acres. And so you'll see here like the lagoon shoreline where you see the boats on the left-hand side, that was all Australian pine. During a 20-year period, we removed more than 4,000 of those Australian pine trees. In some places, as you can see, it was literally taken down to the dirt. And even though the Nature Conservancy staff, planned and oversaw the restoration, the community was such an integral part of this. And we had thousands of volunteers who donated their time and efforts over that 20-year period to helping us with removing the invasive species and planting native species back in place so we could kind of give those plants a leg up and not give the invasives time to reestablish. Now, Sarah will tell you later on, it's definitely, the work is not done. We are constantly battling invasive species, but this restoration was just such a fantastic way to be able to place those 4 native ecosystems back here on these landscapes, because on so many barrier islands in Southeast Florida, due to development, these ecosystems just don't exist anymore. And so I think we'll take a closer look at the ecosystems that I mentioned, and we're kind of going to take you on a journey across the barrier island. So we're going to start on the western edge, which is our Indian River Lagoon estuary, talk about those shoreline habitats. We'll then focus on the habitats that are found in the interior or the middle of the barrier island, and then we'll journey out to our Atlantic Ocean shoreline and talk more about those famous rocks. So we will start off here on our Indian River Lagoon shoreline, and the predominant ecosystem that you find in that area is called a mangrove swamp. Some people also call it a mangrove forest because some people don't like swamps. I personally think they're great places except for the mosquitoes. So we have a look here at a few different species of mangroves. We'll talk about those more in just a minute as well. So this picture that you're seeing here is actually on our elevated boardwalk that takes you through our mangrove forest. Now, believe it or not, this was part of that habitat restoration that I was talking about just a minute ago. And when this boardwalk went in, all of these towering mangroves that you see were only about knee high. So over the 30 or odd years since that restoration happened, all of these mangroves have grown up to create this really lush, beautiful forest that you can walk through now. And here's a look at the 3 different species of mangroves that we have in Florida. The term mangrove does not refer to plants that are necessarily closely related. It's kind of a general term for trees that can tolerate salty water because, as I mentioned, the Indian River Lagoon is an estuary. So that means that we have brackish water. And we are located relatively close to an inlet where the lagoon is connected to the ocean. So these trees are really able to withstand ocean level salinity. So the 3 species that you're seeing here in the picture on the left, you can see the trees with the big arching roots. Those are our red mangroves. Typically, they are found closest to the water. And then intermixed with the red mangroves or just landward of them is where you typically see the black mangroves. And the black mangrove is distinguished easily by the finger-like roots that you can see sticking up through the sand. And those actually help the tree get oxygen because they typically grow in a soil type of environment. We call it detritus because it's basically decomposed mangrove leaves that have broken down, but that soil can be very anoxic. It lacks oxygen. So those little snorkel roots that we nickname them, they help the tree get the oxygen that it needs. And then in the lower right-hand corner, you can see a picture of the tree canopy from a white mangrove. You can't distinguish that tree by the roots because the roots are all underground, but you can look at the leaves. They have 2 little nodes on either side of the stem. So that's the easiest way to identify a white mangrove. And you can find all 3 of those species on the preserve. And of course, we have a very robust bird population here at the preserve. This is a look at one of the osprey nests that we have on the property. We have 1 to 2 nests each year. And osprey, as many of you all know, you see them throughout the country, also called fish hawks. They have a very rich environment here in which to fish between the estuary as well as the ocean. And here's a look at some of the other bird life that we have here. The birds love, especially the ibis, as you can see in that picture, kind of foraging around the red mangrove roots. There's just so much food for them to find in there, and we'll take a look at some of the items that are their food here in just a minute. So going lower down on the food chain, on the left-hand side here, you see our beautiful native green anoles. These are quite small lizards. They maybe only grow to several inches, less than 6 inches, and they are just such a brilliant green. Now, sadly, you will see lots of lizards if you ever visit Florida, but most of them are not native. Now, these green anoles are one of the only native species that we have in this area, and unfortunately their numbers have declined due to the robust numbers of different invasive lizards that we have. And then on the right-hand side here, you see a cute little fiddler crab. These crabs are quite small, maybe only a couple, 3 inches. And these are actually a good food item for some of those birds that we saw just a minute ago. Now, this fiddler crab, you can tell just by looking at the picture that it is a male, because you might notice that it has 1 very large claw, 1 very tiny claw. And if you can ever look on the internet, if you haven't seen fiddler crabs before, to see a picture of them, the males will actually stand outside of their burrows and wave their large claw in the air. Sometimes they do that to dissuade other males from coming nearby, but primarily it's to attract a mate. So they like to show off for the ladies. And I'm actually going to pass it off to Sarah to take us through some of our more interior terrestrial habitats.
Thank you, Chris. And hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Martin, the South Florida Land Conservation Coordinator based here at Blowing Rocks Preserve. It's nice to meet you all today. And yes, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our maritime hammock habitat that we have here at the preserve. So the maritime hammock is it is a tropical hardwood hammock primarily here at the preserve. So we've got 73 acres, and as Chris mentioned, these different types of habitats that occur on the barrier island. And our maritime hammock is really special because it has grown on what we call ancient dunes. So at different points in time in history, our beachfront and where the land met the water was much different. So we had different levels of sea rise and different places where the historic beach dune would have occurred. So long ago, our beach dune would have been where this maritime hammock is now located, which is just further in from our actual beach dune. The beach dune has some topography because of that, because it's on these old rolling dunes. And it is made up primarily of tree species. So trees such as our gumbo limbo tree and a lot of tropical hardwood trees are found here. These species of trees evolved with the harsh conditions that we experience here in South Florida, such as hurricanes. And they are very, very strong, hardy trees that can withstand strong winds and salty, harsh environments, and experience something we call natural pruning. So if you're to look at a tropical maritime hammock from an aerial perspective, or even from standing out on our beach dune, you would see that it has perfectly rounded. And that is because of the salt wind shear that has shaped that, that hammock forest here on the barrier island. And these species, such as our gumbo limbo tree, which is a beautiful tree, if you ever come to South Florida and see it, it's got a kind of reddish brownish bark that kind of peels. Sometimes we call it the tourist tree because it looks like it's got a sunburn. These trees have adapted with these conditions. So for instance, during a hurricane, the gumbo limbo tree will easily drop its limbs in a storm, and then those limbs weeks later will start growing new sprouts and new shoots from the ground, so that that population will always have a survival. So if that tree happens to fall in a hurricane, it will persist. The maritime hammock also has some really beautiful and exciting understory plants. And so to your left here, we've got our wild coffee. It's not a true coffee, but looks very similar to coffees if anybody here is from places that have coffee. It has got these lush, beautiful red berries that the wildlife really cherish for a food source, but also provides a lot of great color. So when we're making recommendations to folks who want to utilize more of South Florida's native plants in their landscape, this is one that we highly recommend. To the right is one of my favorites. It's called a Jamaica caper. It's a beautiful plant that has these bursts of pink and white flowers that both occur at the same time. So when the flowers first bloom in the springtime on our Jamaica capers, they come out white, but then become pink later on in the day. And so you'll often in the morning time see a Jamaica caper that will have both pink and white flowers, and really got great evergreen leaves as well. So another one that we highly recommend for native plant enthusiasts and folks who want to use more natives in their South Florida yards. And just on that note of our maritime hammock and transitioning to our coastal strand and the maritime hammock, those are our two uplands on the barrier island. So we're surrounded by water here. We don't have a whole lot of topography here in South Florida, but just those small little changes in elevation make a huge difference for us. And so our maritime hammocks and our coastal strand are both our uplands on the barrier island. And these habitats are particularly imperiled because these would have been some of the habitats most desirable to build upon when development really took hold in Florida. So we don't have a whole lot of it left. And it's very obvious when you're in South Florida, it's very hard to find an actual maritime hammock or patch of coastal strand. Our coastal strand is made up of primarily a saw palmetto. So when you look at a coastal strand habitat, you will see a large continuation of this saw palmetto plant. So you can see it here pretty prominently in this photo. But intermixed in between are a lot of tropical shrubs and a lot of herbaceous diversity that support a great array of wildlife, such as our gopher tortoises, which are state endangered, and a lot of different birds and small mammals and other critters. It is rapidly disappearing, which I will tell you more about later. Some of the plants that you will find here in our coastal strand are some of my favorites on the preserve. Down in the bottom, we've got our coral bean plant, which is for Florida, an interesting plant that flowers here in the winter. It's got wonderful cones of magenta leaves, and it's just a real beauty. You can find it here in the coastal strand and some of our other habitats here in Florida, and actually up the coast, all the way up into the Northeast. So this is something that you will see in some other habitats, but finding it in coastal strand is pretty special. We also have a wild poinsettia down to our left, our necklace pod tree here, and one of the more important plants here on the preserve is our bay cedar up in the right-hand corner. You will find that in coastal strand and sometimes particularly here at Blowing Rocks on our beach dune habitat, and it supports the Marshall scrub hairstreak butterfly, of which Blowing Rocks Preserve is the northernmost extent where you can actually, that butterfly has been observed. It is an imperiled butterfly, and so having that northern range for it is a pretty special thing for Blowing Rocks. Glad it's protected. Oh, we've got more here. So we've got a lot of different butterflies. We've got actually coming up here on June 27th, we work with the North American Butterfly Association to implement an annual 4th of July butterfly survey at the preserve. So we've got that coming up to take note of some of the butterflies that we've got here. We've been surveying since the 80s. And this place is pretty special for butterflies. We have so many different wildflowers and pollinator plants here, and you will find a great array of butterfly plants here that support these butterflies and also see the butterflies on the preserve. The Gulf fritillary is one that you will definitely see a lot of. It really appreciates the habitats here. Down in the bottom left is our zebra longwing. That's our state butterfly. It's one of my favorite. And we've got a few others here, such as our Cassius blue, great southern white, and Atala butterfly. And so those habitats, our uplands, transition quite smoothly from one place to the next with this wonderfully intact habitat that is the preserve into a beach dune. And some of the plants that you'll find here at Blowing Rocks, you really just can't find on a lot of other beach dunes in the region today because of so much development. But because Blowing Rocks is entirely intact, our beach dunes have been able to build themselves quite naturally over time. And we have quite a rich diversity of beach dune species. So that beach star, it's one of our state listed plants. You don't find it in a lot of beaches, but we sure do have it here at Blowing Rocks. Our beach dune is primarily comprised of some of the keystone species, such as our beach sea oats, which you'll see out in the right-hand corner, our railroad vine, the beautiful beach sunflower, which you'll find all over the preserve. But some of our more imperiled species, such as our beach morning glory that you see there in the middle, that you can't find on most beaches today in the region. And I am going to pass this on to Kristen. She's going to tell you a little bit more about some of our, as we go from the beach dune to the ocean, some of the species you're going to find.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, so as you move from the dune over to our rocky shoreline, this does provide a unique habitat for some animals, although we don't necessarily have, tide pooling as much like you might find in more rocky shorelines, like I mentioned, on the West Coast in California or Hawaii. So some of the animals that you do find on the beach itself include our ghost crabs, maybe a shoreline wolf spider, which is always an interesting one to see creeping around. And then, of course, we already talked about some of the shorebirds that utilize the Indian River Lagoon shoreline. Here's some that we tend to see more on our ocean shoreline. So we do get the birds like the sanderlings that are more predominantly based on the beach itself. And we're also lucky because we do sometimes see more pelagic species, such as the frigate birds that you can see in that picture there. And especially during the winter, some of those more pelagic birds will unfortunately become exhausted from migration or just from the storms they encounter and get washed onto our beach. So we also do have a very active bird rescue program, and we work closely with the local animal hospital if we do find any birds that are in need of assistance to get some renourishment and then be released. And then let's take a closer look at the namesake for our preserve, which is our beautiful Anastasia limestone rock formation. So to tell you a little bit of information about the rocks themselves, in geologic time, this is not necessarily an ancient structure. They're thought to be about 125,000 years old. And the portion of the extent, of the rocks actually occur along the majority of Florida's East Coast. So if anybody here, like I mentioned, South Florida earlier, so if anybody here is familiar with like Boca Raton or Fort Lauderdale, that's actually where you find this ridge of rock originating, and it goes up to the very northern border of Florida near Jacksonville. However, the reason that Blowing Rocks is so unique is because the stretch of beach that we have here is the largest continuous exposed portion of that rocky ridge. So although it does vary a little bit, you know, in this picture, you can see these folks looking down at the water. And in some places it could be up to maybe a 7-foot drop from the top of the water down to the ocean or even more. It's also highly variable. So barrier islands are very dynamic environments. You know, the ocean and nature in general don't like to stay in one place and look the same way for very long. So barrier islands naturally shift depending mostly on the season. So typically in the winter, which is when this picture was taken, and the one behind me as well, you can see how the foliage looks kind of brown. That's when we tend to get bigger winter storms, which bring in larger ocean swells, and that naturally creates erosion with the sand being taken off of the beach. So at that time, you may see more of this rock exposed, whereas the season that we're in right now, in the summertime, when we have the nice calm waves, that actually brings the sand back up onto the beach and causes more accretion or the sand building up. So sometimes people come here in the summer and there was sand deposited on the beach. They can't see some of the rocks and they go, what did you guys do? Did you move the rocks? Where are they? So we have to explain to people that that's a natural process. And, you know, things can change very rapidly here, even from week to week. So in this photo, you can see a storm event that we have. And so if you came on the beach before this storm and then walked out after, the beach itself could look totally transformed. So that dynamic nature of barrier islands is really amazing how resilient that ecosystem is. And I think we're going to see a video. Yes. So just the power of those waves as they come up. This could be during a winter storm. We also see this occasionally if we have a hurricane offshore that's pushing large swells up onto the beach, or some of you in the Northeast, you might know your winter nor'easters. Those can actually, because of the pressure system, push large ocean swells down to our coast as well, which is when you tend to see this very dramatic water coming up onto the rocks, and the force from the waves hitting the rocks just forces that water up into the air. On really dramatic days, you pull up in our parking lot, you can hear the force of these waves hitting the rocks. It's so incredible. Now, that being said, you can't expect to see this phenomena just any old day here at the preserve. This is probably 5 to 10% of the days. So the good news is when we have nice calm days like we do today in the summertime, it's also a beautiful place to walk underneath the rocks and explore. You can snorkel to see things like nurse sharks or sea turtles. So whatever season you come, there are always fantastic things to see.
Thanks, Kristen, and Sarah for those introductions into the various habitats. And I'm wondering now if maybe we could transition after we covered a lot of ground there, maybe focus a little bit, and Sarah, going over to you about how do you continue to care for the preserve, and what does, you know, whatever changes that you're seeing happening as a result from climate change and things along those lines.
Sure. Okay, so now we are we're moving over to the Indian River Lagoon, which Kristen touched on a bit when she talked about the mangrove swamp or mangrove forest habitat that we have here at the preserve. And this is where the Indian River Lagoon meets the preserve on our western boundary. So for land management is essentially what we do to ensure that the preserve's natural resources continue to thrive and are in their most healthy condition. You know, we have the best biodiversity, we're supporting our imperiled and even common species on the preserve, and just really managing these resources for today, but for the future. And so it's really important that we're tuned into what's happening on the landscape. And there are a lot of different things that impact the landscape. So many, I'm not going to mention all today, that we really have to factor in when we do land management at the preserve. But some of the ones that I know are on so many people's minds today, and some of probably the ones that have the most impact are going to be sea level rise and climate change. And this is something, being in South Florida, is very real for us, not just here at the preserve, but really, really everywhere. We are seeing a lot of our uplands here on the preserve transition to different habitats. So where we've historically had coastal strand habitat, which is that upland that I told you all about, it's imperiled, it's primarily dominated by our saw palmettos, great big, you know, we don't have the redwoods that we have out west here in Florida, but some of our saw palmettos in the state have been dated back to thousands of years old. And so just to kind of give it a little bit of a context, to be losing that type of habitat and to see the sea level rise impacts where we're now gaining our coastal wetlands, which we love our coastal wetlands. I don't want to say not nice things about them. We love them. But to see our uplands, it's hard, but this is something that's happening and we can't ignore it. And so it is genuinely part of our land management that we do here. So monitoring what's happening, working with our science team and our regional experts, partners in TNC and beyond to develop strategies that really are resilient for our terrestrial ecosystems and adaptive to these changes. And so this picture that we're looking at here today, this is, there's a little white thing that's kind of, I was thinking that maybe I would show you guys this today live, but with the thunderstorms, we're looking at it today from photo. This is a groundwater well where we are able to monitor the groundwater salinity and the saltwater intrusion that's happening to our freshwater lens on the preserve. So all of our plants that would have occurred on those upland coastal strand upland coastal strand habitat, those are all freshwater dependent species. So as we're getting more tidal fluctuation, more saltwater inundation for longer, more frequent and more longer periods of time, we need to monitor that to understand what's happening. So we are monitoring and observing what's happening to our freshwater, complementing it with vegetation monitoring. So just actual changes to our structure here. So on the right-hand side, you can see in the background there's a cabbage palm, saw palmetto, which is all upland. In the forefront, we've got a grass called torpedo grass, which is actually an invasive species, and I'll tell you a little bit more about in a moment. So this picture was on the right was taken in 2018. And that really kind of shows that upland habitat that we've got there. It's dominated by palms, which are uplands. And this picture on the left is basically in that same exact location. And all of our palmetto are now gone in that area in a very short period of time. We have lost those palms and palmettos, and it is now dominated by a plant we call Barrickia, or sea oxeye daisy, which is a great wetland plant. It's moved into this area along with a lot of other wetland species. And so these things are happening, they're inevitable, but we have different problems that we need to address as these things are happening. So these changes are occurring. We've got species such as this torpedo grass that take advantage of kind of the changes that are happening and want to move into these areas. And so just thinking ahead of the bar a little bit and what these areas are inevitably becoming, how do we manage these invasive species and other impacts and help these areas transition in the most resilient way possible? So working with our native plant nursery is really important. We grow plants such as this Spartina grass that we just saw and some of these mangroves. A lot of these we plant out now into areas where we know we're losing our strand and we're gaining some of our tidal marshes and our coastal wetlands to help shade out, for instance, the torpedo grass. So if that area is stable, if it is more matured a little bit quickly, kind of just speeding it up a little bit, we can help mitigate some of those problems, such as the invasive species issues on the lagoon shoreline. So that's one of the things that we're doing. But there's a lot, it's a lot to think about with our trails, for instance, and how do we manage our trails and manage for wildlife. So this preserve is really important for different types of coastal barrier island wildlife, like this cute bobcat here. Can't help but smile when I see it. So again, it's a balance between monitoring what we have so we can understand what we have at the preserve. What species are utilizing these natural habitats and are depending on them, and what are we doing to manage for those species? So this year we have a small mammal study going on at the preserve that's being implemented by our Student Conservation Association intern. And that involves the use of trail cams and bucket cams, which are cameras. Essentially, you can see this bucket that's kind of strategically tucked away into the palm debris here and into the Barrickia that sea oxeye daisy forest that we have here. And essentially it's basically a non-invasive way of monitoring and understanding what kind of wildlife are utilized. Small mammals in particular are utilizing some of these habitats. So there's a lot of different types of wildlife, but the small mammals, they're a little bit more elusive. And so this is a great way of understanding that. So some of the different species that we have observed so far using this methodology is we definitely have bobcats on the preserve. We've got a pretty decent population of them, which, you know, you go on to other places on the Barrier Island and they really aren't there. We've got blue land crabs, which are, again, they really need that intact habitat that we've got here at the preserve, but maybe you can't find elsewhere on the island. We do have coyotes, which have expanded their range on the preserve over time. And we have raccoons. And those are just a few that our intern Alston has observed. We actually have quite a list of different species, including the short-tailed southern shrew or short-nosed southern. I'm messing this up. I have to look back at the notes, but some pretty cool wildlife that we've documented here. Just with this methodology. We also are working with some of our partners to implement a southern beach mouse study at the preserve to determine its presence or absence, which is presumed extirpated for our region, but we do have the suitable habitat for. So that's an ongoing study. We've worked with other partners on other types of wildlife surveys and monitoring, really, again, because it's so critical for us to understand what kind of imperiled and common species are utilizing this place and in what kind of abundance, so that we can offer the best natural resources for them as possible. And one of our biggest is species management. That is our seabirds, shorebirds, gopher tortoises, a lot of different wildlife, but our sea turtles are the one that we are really well known for. So Elaine, I guess I'll pause for a moment. This is, oh, okay, maybe it's not playing. Well, anyways, I'll tell you a little bit more about our sea turtles. So here at the preserve, we have 3 species of sea turtles that nest here each year. So we have a sea turtle nesting season that goes from about March through October. And there are many species, I think 6 species that will nest in Florida, but 3 that will nest here at the preserve specifically. So the first to arrive for us each year are leatherback sea turtles, which that's a little cute hatchling up in the right-hand corner. Next to arrive is our loggerhead sea turtles, and down at the bottom, the more of the summer nester is our green sea turtle. And each season we get upwards of sometimes 1,000 sea turtle nests here at the preserve on our 1 mile of ocean shoreline, which I must say is often covered in Anastasia limestone rocks, making it quite impassable for these sea turtles. So for the amount of nesting habitat that we actually have on the preserve, we're extremely well densely nested here at this place. And most of that has to do with the fact that we've got such great intact natural habitat from the lagoon to the ocean. So here we've got some daytime nesters. Typically our beach is nested in the evening, in the dark night. But every once in a while, early in the morning, you can still catch a sea turtle going out from the ocean up into the dunes and nesting even in the early morning daytime hours. So here we've got some sea turtles doing just that. This is what our nests look like after the sea turtle monitors have marked them. So not every single sea turtle nest is marked on our ocean shoreline. That would just look silly because we've got so many, but they do mark a certain percentage of them that helps with some of their data collection and research when they monitor these populations of sea turtles that nest on the beach. So when we have an orange kind of flagged off triangle or sometimes square on the beach, that's what it is. It's a sea turtle nest that's going to be checked later on by the monitors. And so our Anastasia limestone rock ridge, as amazing it is and the natural protection that it provides for thousands of years has also been a place where some of these imperiled sea turtles become stuck when they come up to nest. So the sea turtles, they will come up and the rocks will be just low enough that they can kind of start to climb up over them to get onto the beach, but they cannot move backwards and they often will get stuck. And so we have a bona fide sea turtle rescue team here at Blowing Rocks, which is a little bit unique, I think, for any other place in the state because of the rock ridge. And that really includes our all hands on deck from our staff and from dedicated volunteers who come together to patrol the beach each morning and look for adults that are stuck in the rocks, as well as hatchlings who can become stuck in the rocks. Also, sometimes they will wash ashore because they've been wounded by a vessel or by natural causes such as a shark. Sometimes they're entangled in plastics and fishing gear. Other times they're sick and emaciated because maybe they've ingested plastics. And so our team is trained and permitted through the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission to respond to these stranded sea turtles and to either get them rapidly back into the ocean if they're just stuck and need to get back out, or onto rehabilitation with some of our rehabilitation partners if that is what they need. This is really important, especially for our large sea turtles. It takes them sometimes 30 to 50 years to reach sexual maturity. So for them to actually get to that stage of life and to be able to reproduce is incredibly important. Maybe 1 in 30,000 hatchlings actually make it onto that age to do that. So by saving one large sea turtle, we're saving thousands of nests to be laid in the future. So it's important work. Here you can see some of our hatchling trucks that are these teeny tiny little, it looks like someone took a little race car or something and zoomed from the beach on into the ocean. These are some of the telltale signs of when we know a nest is hatched. So our team will look for those to make sure that they've all gotten safely out into the ocean. And it's a pretty cool phenomenon here at Blowing Rocks. This little leatherback hatchling is making its way out to the ocean just right there. And it's really important that this part of their life cycle is such a special moment. They spend most of their life out in the ocean, but just those brief critical moments of being born on the land and for the mothers to come up and lay their nests in the night, you know, they have some key moments here on land. So as natural resource managers, it's critical for us to make sure that special moment happens for them. And with that, I will pass it on to Kristen.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, folks, we just wanted to wrap up with sharing with you some of the ways that you can hopefully visit with us in the future or become involved. So we are, you know, like everyone else, still experiencing some challenges due to COVID. So I will let you know that the best course of action, if you wish to visit or get involved in the near future, is to definitely check our website. And I'm going to speak to the other times, the outside of COVID times, in the hopes that we can get back to those soon. So typically we are open to the public 7 days a week, from 9 until 4:30. And we are closed on specific holidays. So of course we welcome general visitors at that time to do anything from walk our nature trails, to swim in the ocean, to fishing, botanizing, do plant ID, all sorts of different things. And then we also, as you know, we've mentioned a couple of times throughout this presentation, how integral volunteers are to all of our work. So we do have an outreach and volunteer specialist. Her name is Kate Brown. She is a fantastic resource for anyone who is looking to get involved through volunteering. We have, you know, regular volunteer opportunities, maybe weekly, folks who work in our native plant nursery, like Eric, who's here weeding so that we ensure the plants that we're out planting aren't coming loaded up with undesirable plants. And then we also have more like our monthly opportunities that anyone can show up for. Like that's happening here with Sarah leading a group of volunteers on the right in one of our shoreline cleanups. So we also do offer education programming for youth, adult groups, college groups. We offer alternative spring break programming for university students. So there's really a lot of ways to get involved. I think
Right.
we're ready for some questions.
Yes, thank you so much
Thanks,
to Kristen and Sarah for that wonderful overview, and we appreciate your insights into the preserve. And just a reminder for anyone, if you still have questions, go ahead and submit those in the Q&A box. I know we have quite a few already there, so we're going to get started and try and get to as many questions as we can. And Kristen, we're going to, this first question I think I'm going to pass to you, and this actually came in advance to us, and the person was wondering, you know, given how close the preserve is located to an urban development area, how does that affect the preserve? And also, do we see effects from boat traffic? Does it erode the shorelines and things like that?
Yes, great question. You know, certainly being so close to that urban development, as I mentioned, results in very high public visitation. There's a lot of demand for folks to visit the preserve. So, you know, we try to be very mindful of balancing being able to give people that real connection to nature through whatever activity it is that they might like to do, hiking, fishing, things like that. But we also are very mindful of the fact that the reason we are here is for conservation. So, you know, even though the preserve is 73 acres, a relatively small portion of that is open by trails. The rest of the preserve is not open to the public. It's only accessed, you know, by Sarah and her team to conduct those land conservation activities. And then Elaine, the question about the boat traffic, you know, we do have boat traffic on both our ocean shoreline as well as our Indian River Lagoon shoreline. But the lagoon shoreline is actually where we see the most impacts from that. The Indian River Lagoon itself is a long body of water. It's 156 miles, but in our portion, it's very narrow, so maybe only half a mile wide. So there's a dredged portion in the middle, which is the intracoastal waterway that some people might be familiar with. We are very close to the intercoastal, so boats do pass by at a very high rate of speed, which brings a large boat wake up onto the shoreline. So Sarah mentioned like the mangrove outplantings that we do. So we do try our best to manage for resiliency on that shoreline because we know how effective those nature-based solutions can be.
And actually, Sarah, to follow up on this a little bit more in terms of just proximity to urban development, another question came in about how do we deal with invasive species that might come in from neighboring properties that are so close to the preserve, since it's a small preserve, and then we know we have neighbors right on either side of us?
That's a great question. And so it's here at the preserve, we're always monitoring for anything that might be coming in. And in particular, our boundaries are some of the places where we will encounter some of these things the most. And so just staying on top of what actually is happening out on the landscape, that's one of the land manager's most important jobs, is just being tuned in to what we actually have, what's happening, what's changed, and then always evaluating and adapting to that. So we definitely monitor, and then we're out there on the landscape ready to take care of anything that we need to. But beyond that, it's also really, so we don't want to exist in a bubble. It's important for us to work with our partners and our neighbors on some of these issues. And so, for instance, here at the preserve, there is a neighboring condo association just down the road, and we're working with them and some of our invasive species partners to help them remove invasive species from their beach dune. And so not only are they going to remove those, but then they're also going to plant some natives on their beach dune, which not only will help with invasive species issues for the barrier island, but also will help promote better resilient dune habitat that's so essential for sea turtles. So the hope is that, you know, you plant a seed and you can work with additional neighbors in the future. Hopefully they'll be inspired to inspire their neighbors and keep getting the word out. It's part of our job, is to not just take care of what we have here, but to work with others to make the most impact. And so working with our invasive species partners in our region is really critical on adjacent conservation lands, but also on the private lands that are nearby, and just really expanding our reach outward that way.
Great. Kristen, this next one might be for you. I know you talked earlier about already how the barrier island shifts. And this person was asking, they were asking about, have we seen that it has shifted or migrated through the years, which you already addressed. But their second question about that was, do we see major impacts from hurricanes that come through? And does that affect the shifting of the barrier island as well?
Yes, we see impacts from hurricanes. And that being said, I have not personally been in Florida long enough to experience a major hurricane, knock on wood, this is not the year. But Sarah and I were both here after Hurricane Irma, which was 3 to 4 years ago. And it was really remarkable. We didn't have extremely significant impacts from that storm, but we had a fairly, a close call. And when Sarah and I came to the preserve, I think it was like 2 days after the storm, and we walked on the beach, the sand had been taken away so much that, in an area where there might be like usually 10 feet of rock on the edge, we saw rock exposed to maybe 40 feet back. So that was very cool to see. And the most amazing part is that maybe 4 days later, that was all covered up again. So again, just goes to show how dynamic it is. And Sarah had mentioned how naturally resilient many of the plants in these ecosystems are. Another great example of that is on our beach dune, we have sea grape plants. And they might get a lot of the leaf canopy stripped away during the storm. But again, this is the habitat in which they evolved. So they are able to naturally replace that. And then come back to their, full strength after not too long of a time.
Sarah, I think this next question might be for you. One person was asking about the mangrove species. We highlighted, or Kristen highlighted red, black, and white mangroves. They're asking, are there other mangroves in Florida or outside of Florida beyond those 3 types? And 2, do we happen to know if one species sequesters carbon more than any of the other species as we're thinking about climate change and impacts?
Great questions. Yes, there definitely are other species of mangroves in the world. Those are the 3 that we have here in South Florida. And we also have a tree called the buttonwood, which occurs within the mangrove forest niche. And kind of think of it as a mangrove cousin, if you will. It's not a true mangrove, but it functions very similarly and will be found in that type of habitat. So our buttonwoods are also really important here at the preserve. And let's see, so we have in Florida, there have been occasions where actually mangroves have been introduced from other places through botanical gardens and things like that, and unfortunately have escaped out into the wild and caused some impacts. Fortunately, though, they were recognized and dealt with pretty rapidly because we do have a pretty good invasive species response here in the region. So that is it for our mangroves. And then, I'm sorry, what was the second part of that, Elaine? I lost it.
About, do we know if any species of mangroves sequester more carbon than another?
Oh, yeah. So that is a great question. I know there's a lot of research being done on that right now. And so that's, again, why it's really important for us to be working with our science team and science partners to investigate those kinds of things in the future. We do know that mangroves absolutely store carbon. As to which species might do the best job at it, I would probably be speculating if I was going to say red mangrove today, but I don't know that. So Kristen, unless you have the answer, I would just say that I do know that as we develop our land management goals and as we think towards the future, those are certainly things that we're looking at and working with our science folks on identifying those kinds of things.
This next question is about 2 species, and one of them I realized we did not touch on today, which we should have probably. The first one is one of the birds, though, the least tern that we mentioned earlier, wanting to know, are they year-round at the preserve or are they just migratory? And then the second question is, do we have manatees in the lagoon? And if they are there, how are they ever affected by red tide or anything? Do we see that in our portion of the Indian River Lagoon?
You want me to take the manatee, Sarah? And you could do.
What's that? Yeah, you want to take the manatee turn.
Sure. Divide and conquer. So yes, we do have manatees in the Indian River Lagoon. They are definitely one of our lovable, charismatic megafauna that occur in the region. So we do see them occasionally. I wouldn't say they're common, but on our Indian River Lagoon shoreline, I remember we had an intern who came snorkeling with us on their first day. A manatee swam within 10 feet. I was like, this is the luckiest day for you ever, because you could go a long time here and not see a manatee. The question about impacts from harmful algal blooms. Manatees in Florida are absolutely impacted by a number of harmful algal blooms that could include red tide. The predominant area in Florida where you see red tide occurring is mostly on the Gulf Coast, but occasionally it does hop a ride in the current, make it over here to us on the East Coast. But especially in the Indian River Lagoon, unfortunately, we have been seeing very significant impacts to manatees, mostly in the northern extent of the Indian River Lagoon, closer to Cape Canaveral, the Melbourne, Florida area. So for folks who are interested in that, I would definitely encourage you to read up more on it because there are a lot of impacts, but they're not necessarily being seen in our immediate area here in Jupiter.
Our lease terns are in fact migratory. So they're only here for the summer months, and we implement a breeding and nesting shorebird and seabird survey in conjunction with the Florida Shorebird Alliance and Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission at the preserve to monitor for any kind of nesting or breeding activity here. So yeah, they're just a joy that we get to see in the summer months, essentially. And they arrive around the time that the sea turtles do and pretty much fly onward. There are a couple populations of least terns. I think there's a population that's out on the west coast of the United States. There's an interior population and an Atlantic population, and we have the Atlantic population.
Well, I think we have time for one last question, and I'm going to try and wrap a couple. We've had lots of sea turtle questions come in. So I'm going to try and wrap a couple of those into things that you hit on a little bit and that you can expand on for us, Sarah. And I'll list a couple of things here. One, do we ever raise the sea turtles from hatchling to they're a little bit more mature to help, ensure more survival rate, since you mentioned that so few of them actually survive to maturity? And then do we ever restrict visitors during sea turtle nesting time? And if we could reiterate when that time period is, do we ever restrict visitors to try and, give a little bit more space to the sea turtles?
I mean, luckily, so the preserve, and Kristen, if you want to chime on this too, like the hours that we're open to the public actually really are quite different than when the sea turtles utilize the preserve. So pretty much all of the magic happens in the night and in the early morning hours. And so by the time the preserve is actually open to the public, the turtles are basically done doing what they do out here, which works quite nicely. I don't know, Kristen, if you wanted to say anything else about that.
I think that's great.
Yeah, we do. And it's great because so many beaches in Florida, are open during the night. And so they don't have that luxury. We're a dark beach. There's no lighting here. It makes a huge impact. So when you look at the nest density of other beaches in the region, Blowing Rocks is incredibly densely nested. And it's because we've got that intact habitat from the lagoon to the ocean. And it's dark. It's a dark beach. There's no lights. And it's quite wild still, relatively speaking, for South Florida. As far as rearing sea turtles, no, we don't do that. I don't know that too many places do. They're such wild creatures that have such wild instincts that me personally speaking, I don't think that's something that we could mimic. They are federally listed species, so there's a whole lot of, it's basically our conservation mechanisms don't involve that.
All right. Well, I know this hour has gone by really quickly, but thank you to Kristen and Sarah, to both of you for joining us today and for sharing your expertise with us and giving us a really good glimpse into what this preserve has to offer. And I know there's so much for people to see. So I really hope that we have sparked the interest of all of you joining us today to hopefully come and visit us one day soon. We would love to have you at the preserve. And as we continue to provide opportunities like these for you to connect with us virtually, we would love to hear your candid feedback. My colleague John is going to be sharing a post with you in the chat window for a survey link. We would love for you to take just a couple of moments and share your thoughts with us. And I'm also, let me share my screen one more time here. I want to remind everyone that we do have our last field trip in this Bring Nature Home series coming up next Wednesday. It's on June 23rd. We'll be heading to the Sky Island region of Arizona. If you haven't registered, there is still time to do so. So I hope you can join us for that. And if you had any questions that you still want answered that we weren't able to get to today, please send us an email at webcast@tnc.org. We'd be happy to follow up with you afterward. So with that, I'll go ahead and close us out and just say thank you again for joining us. And one last thanks to Kristen and Sarah. We really appreciate all of you joining us and for your commitment to our mission. Your support truly enables us to continue protecting remarkable places like the one we visited today. And it also ensures that our future generations get to enjoy their beauty and splendor as well. So thank you so much. Take care, and we hope to see you back here next week as we journey to southeastern Arizona. Have a good one.